Okay, so I'm back. Um, what we're going to start looking at now is we're going to start looking at jQuery, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of it. Um, so jQuery really is nothing more. It's powerful, but it's nothing more than a JavaScript library that just makes working with the DOM, which is what ends up loading in the browser, what you're looking at, just makes it a lot easier to use. JavaScript is could be a little bit tricky, and jQuery is kind of the standard choice for libraries. In fact, it's got a lot of Microsoft support. So, I mean, you could find out a lot about jQuery, but it's one of those things where it's been around for a while. Even looking at this on Wikipedia, so it's been around. It's used on a bunch of sites. It was released about 6 years ago, and I think that just the way that it was written, what ended up happening was that there were a lot of developers that were doing server-side code that didn't really want anything to do with JavaScript. JavaScript is not a strongly typed language. It was sort of frowned upon as a scripting language, and I think they didn't really want a lot to do with it. I think what ended up happening is that the library for jQuery, the jQuery library, just made life a lot easier for doing some DOM scripting, and at that point, I think people started to adopt it. It had a lot of community support. It was built in a way that it was very extensible. It was a huge thing. So it was extensible, and you could end up creating these plugins. And the plugins, the way that they were written, they worked the same way as the base library. We'll look at some of those plugins too. So an example of plugins would be, things like autocomplete or dialog boxes or that sort of thing. But in essence, really, it's nothing more than a JavaScript library. If I go and look at the jQuery homepage, there's a lot of documentation here. It could be pretty helpful. If you go to download, what I always do is that I end up using the CDN version. So when you end up creating a project in Visual Studio, by default, it'll end up putting in a jQuery library. It'll end up actually putting it'll include it in the layout page. It was included in ours. I ended up taking it out. One of the things is that it's not the current version, although there are some tools that are out there that you can use. Something called NuGet that you could use that will end up getting you the most recent version of the library. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab. There's a link on here from the CDN. So basically, the theory is that you can grab this from the CDN. The advantage to that is that if other people are doing the same thing, then this is probably cached in the user's browser. It's not a huge file anyway. I think the other thing, it just makes you end up using. It's more likely they can end up using the most recent version. And what other reasons? The disadvantage is if you happen to be developing and you don't have an internet connection, you're not really going to be able to do much development. Or if the CDN goes down, but it's more likely that your site is going to go down than I think Google CDN. So I'm going to copy this, and I am going to bring it into my page here. I'm going to put it right here on my layout page. So right now I have this URL content. We haven't looked at that. We'll look actually at some point how the URL content works. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put a script source equals. I had a little surprise before where I had the opening and closing script tag and the same thing, and although this was perfectly legitimate, let me see if it does it again. It was kind of shocking actually to me. So I went in here, and I was testing this out, and let's actually see. I think I had closed this before, so let me do debug start without debugging. Yeah, this is really odd. I mean, this was kind of shocking to me. I remember this happening a while back, but I thought it was something that was not happening anymore. If you actually look at the code that's generated, it's all here, right? I mean, this is our home page. There's not that much on it. The problem is that, and I don't know why this is, but it looks like Firefox is choking on this script tag. Just to pop this open in IE real fast. this is really one of the things that could really drive you crazy. Usually if you run into one of these things where you put some JavaScript in and things are not working, it's funny. I'm running into the same thing in IE. So I don't know. Like I said, I thought that was something I used to really look out for, but I thought it had kind of gone away. So if you have an opening, you just have to make sure that you have an opening and closing script tag. By the way, you can't put anything else in here. What ends up happening is that the browser ends up loading script blocks successively. Again, the browser loads things from top to bottom, and it'll load one script block. After that's loaded, there could be another script block farther on the page. And the way that the browser treats this is that this script block might as well be sitting on this page. I mean, it waits for this thing to load, and it's just JavaScript. There's nothing server-side that's coming there. It's inside of a script tag. JavaScript really is the only script that ends up running in a browser. And if you have Firefox running, you could actually see, if you do reload, you could see that you have a script tag that's here. Now, if we had some JavaScript on our page, we would see that we'd be able to show that as well. So one of the things that I like to do with jQuery right off the bat, just for kicks here, is that we could take part of our page. Let's take our menu. So the big thing about jQuery is that, and again, I teach a course on jQuery, which ends up is running 10 sessions. So there's a lot of stuff, and this is not going to be like a full. You're not going to become experts in it so fast. But the one thing that I always do with JavaScript is everything revolves around the $sign. You do your selectors with the $sign, and then you manipulate those selectors. You could make AJAX calls with the $sign. So I always do a sanity check, and my sanity check is to do alert $sign. So alert, everything in JavaScript is happening in the browser. This code block loads, this next code block loads. It's also interesting to note, if you have an error in a code block, and you have 10 lines in that code block, if you have an error on the first line, the rest of the block won't run, but subsequent blocks will run. I always found that to be somewhat interesting. So if I go here, and this should happen on either of these pages, right? So I get an alert, which is basically, this is showing me the JavaScript, the jQuery $sign function, which doesn't mean all that much now, but we can do some interesting things with it. So one of the things that you might do is, let's just do something really kind of silly. We're going to take our menu that loads, and I can't manipulate the DOM unless the DOM has loaded. Okay, I can't manipulate. What I should say is I can't manipulate an element on the DOM. The DOM loads successively, so it's going to be one piece at a time, right? This menu is going to load before this other stuff. So if I go down here on the bottom of the page, I'll do a couple of things here. First of all, I'm going to make my menu disappear really easily. I'm going to say $sign. And what I'm now using is what's called a selector. So the same way that you have CSS selectors, jQuery allows you to use those CSS selectors to select the items that are on your page. Okay? So I'm basically going to select this menu, UL, the same way that I would put it in a style sheet, ul.menu, okay? And I'm going to say hide. So what ends up happening with jQuery is that jQuery is wrapping around JavaScript. JavaScript, in order to do this in JavaScript, you could do it, but it might be a little bit different in different browsers. And it's just not the easiest thing to use. This ends up giving you, makes it a lot easier. It makes things a lot cross-browser compatible. And once you get used to it, it's a pretty nice thing to know. So if I go here and I click on home, right, my menu is gone, right? It's still actually there. If I look in the DOM, I'll see here's my menu. I could even see display is set to none. I could also go into now if I go in here, I'll see that there's some inline. So what I did here is I clicked on, here's net. This shows you what's going across the wire. We're going to use this to look at our AJAX requests a little bit later on. But I could also go in here and I could go to script, and I could actually even set a breakpoint in here. Okay? And if I go in here and I rerun this, okay, I could go to this line. You see it has not yet executed, right? And again, JavaScript is not going to do anything else until the rest of this ends up loading. This is a breakpoint. And I want to point out a couple things here. This is going to be hard to see, but if you're using Firefox, you could go in here and you could look at different variables. I mean, one thing that I want to show you is that if I said $ul.menu, okay, and I hit the enter key, so this is basically going to allow me to look at that value, okay. What I end up getting when I end up using the dollar sign as a selector, what I get back is it's really a jQuery wrapped set. In essence, it's a collection that's wrapped. I could loop over that collection if I want to, and really it's a collection. It's not just a collection of DOM elements. It's a jQuery collection. So internally, there are a bunch of DOM elements, but I can call any jQuery method that I want on it. Now, I only have one menu that's on the page, but if I had multiple ULs for menu, in fact, I could even see this if I end up going to, and I can't get to my contact page, but I bet you if I just type it in here, contact, right? I'll see both menus are hidden. If I look in here, I'll see here's menu. And this is the script code that I'm looking at. If I look at it from the point of view of the DOM, right, I can see here's my menu, and here's my letter menu, right? They're both hidden. So in this case, if I ended up going in here and going to my script tag and going in and putting a breakpoint down here, I would see something a little bit different. If I went here and it's still here, I can see now that there's two elements that are in my jQuery collection. Okay, let's make this do this something a little bit more interesting here. Let's hide it. Okay. One thing that you have with jQuery is you have something called chaining. So for the most part, what you do with jQuery is that you select what you want and you basically call jQuery methods on it. If you went and looked at the documentation, it tries to break it up in different categories, but if you looked at the documentation, you would find that they break it up into selectors, manipulation, and I think if you look under manipulation, you'll probably find hide. You could also do a search here and look for hide, but you'll find hide. Let's see, do they have it in manipulation? Maybe they have it under, let's see if they have it under CSS. Sometimes it's not clear where this stuff's going to be, or if you don't see it, let's actually just type in hide. Okay, so here's hide. I guess they just put it under basics. So you could call this with no parameters. You could call it with a duration, and you could also use a callback. So one of the things that you have with JavaScript is that JavaScript relies a lot on functions. So for instance, if I went in here and I said hide, and I think this is in milliseconds, so I could put in, let's say I say 2000. Okay. Again, I'm just doing this for demo purposes to get us used to this. And if I save this, well, let me get rid of my breakpoint. I don't need it right here. Okay, here's my menu, and it's disappearing over the course of my menus, I should say, right? And they're disappearing over the course of 2 seconds, right? So that's doesn't make a lot of sense here, okay? You could also do some things that are kind of interesting. You could hide them to start, okay? And you could use chaining. So chaining allows you to basically say, look, here's my collection. Let me fade it in. It's another method to fade in. And there's some other, a lot of these are overloaded methods. Even though JavaScript really doesn't support overloading, within this function, you could basically sort of sniff out your parameter values to find out what's being called. And again, this is an introduction of jQuery. The main thing, one thing you have to know for sure is how to select things with jQuery, and you could look at the documentation to, determine all the things that you could do with jQuery collections. But let me get rid of my breakpoint here. And so if I click on here, so I don't know if you can even see this. it's fading in, right? You can sort of see that. Right, there's the menu, it's fading in. If we want it to be, I think you could also specify a time frame, so we could say we want to fade in over 2 seconds. And again, when this reloads, any change to JavaScript, right, now you can see it's fading in slower. It's kind of silly, but sometimes this is used. I mean, for instance, if we deleted something, maybe what we'll do is we'll have a message that says that the item is deleted, and we'll fade that message in. That's not a bad thing to do. So let's just touch on a couple of other things here. First of all, I had to put this on the bottom of my page because I had to make sure that my menu was loaded. Okay, now that doesn't really make a lot of sense because then I have to. I mean, ideally, I want to put my JavaScript code in a place that I could find it. So I could put it up here, but if I do this, right, you'll see if I say $ul dot menu dot hide. Okay. Right. It's an interesting thing. It doesn't throw an exception. There's no exceptions that get thrown. But what happens is that I'm trying to call hide on a collection that's empty. You could call hide on a collection that's empty. I mean, you can't. I don't have a null exception. I just don't have anything in this collection. So the one thing to always keep in the back of your mind is that the jQuery selectors, okay, give you a collection. It could be an empty collection. It could be a collection of 1. It could be a collection of 1,000. Here, it's a collection of none. Now, what I'm going to do, the $ is overloaded a number of different ways. One of the things I could do to the $ is I could pass in a function. Okay. There's actually some similarity between functions and lambda expressions, which we'll get to in a little bit. But the thing that's kind of interesting about this is that there's an overload for the $. So what happens is that when you pass the $, a CSS selector, it'll select it. If you pass the $, some HTML, it'll actually create it, and you could insert it into the DOM. If you pass the $, a function, okay. If you pass the $, a function, what it'll do is it'll call that function when the DOM is loaded. Okay, it's not the trickiest thing in the world. There's an event called window.load, which will happen when everything in the DOM is loaded. And in essence, what happens is you could hook into that event. Another way to say it is you could subscribe to that event, and that's what's happening here. So one of the things you could do here is if we did this now and we said, and we could also, there's some things you could say hide slow, things like that, or you could put a number in it. Now if I do that, right, it's hiding slowly. Again, I really have no way of getting back, so it's kind of a silly thing to do. I'll just show you one other thing that's kind of interesting. jQuery also has access. Now the DOM, CSS3 recognizes a lot of what are called pseudo selectors. So things like first and last. So the pseudo selector is with the $. I could say, just give me the last UL. If there's a collection, give me the last one. If there's only one, it's going to give you that one. But now if I do this, at least it won't hide my main navigation, right? This hides that one. Now it doesn't really. It's interesting. On the home page, it actually does it with the one menu that I have, right? So again, I'm stuck there. Now that's not really what I want to do, so I'm gonna get rid of that. But again, this is happening when the DOM ends up loading. Now let's take a look at where we want to go here. So what I'm going to use jQuery for at the moment is to do something that is I think we really need to correct, and that is that we've got a form. Let's reload this. Okay, come on. Let's save this. So I have my menu here. So we've got this form. Okay, that we're deleting here, right? We're deleting with a GET request. You could see it here if you end up using Firebug and you do net and we end up clicking on delete. Okay, we're doing a get request to delete. And that's really something that's kind of frowned upon. You could look at on there's some discussions on Stack Overflow. I mean, you don't want to have someone be able to change your data with a get request, because you could have web crawlers that hit that, and all of a sudden, if you don't have security set up right on your site, you're going to delete something. So when you change data, you want to do a post and then a redirect and a get. We're doing a get, and we're doing a redirect back to page A here, right? If we clicked on this, okay, and we clicked on delete, we'd be doing a get, right, and a redirect back to page A. Excuse me, to page L here. So what I want to do is I want to make this delete be a form submission, okay? So this is on, if you recall from last time, we ended up moving this to our results page. That doesn't really change anything. But what I'm going to start out doing is I'm going to start out by modifying our controller. I'm going to make this thing break. And the way that I'm going to make it break is I'm going to say, hey, look, when you delete, and now I'm going to be consistent because any of my changes are going to be with posts, right? And also, eventually we'll end up decorating these things with attributes that specify, what users could do this. So let me build this. And I'm going to go here. Now if I click on delete, right, I get the resource cannot be found. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and I'm going to modify. Now I could go in, we did this in class, right? I mean, I could go in and put a form in here and put a form link, but then it's not going to look like a link. If I still want it to look like a link, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a using HTML. So I went back to my results, and I'm going to, I did this before too. I don't want to wrap this here. I want to do it with my delete. What I'm going to really do, I'm going to hijack the link. So instead of this link making a request, a get request, I'm going to hijack it, and I'm going to make it make a post. And I'm going to say, using HTML begin form. I'm going to go in here and do that. And I'm going to fix this up in a second. I should be able to go in here and let's make sure that this works. I've noticed this before where sometimes, again, Razor is not, it's not perfect. If I go in here and reload this page, actually that looks okay. All right, so I've got my delete. Now you notice that the deleted now is on the next line. The reason why it's on the next line is that forms are considered block elements. So I can put a second parameter here, which are my HTML attributes. And there's nothing that prevents me from putting a style and saying display inline. Okay? All that's doing is adding some HTML. Let me actually even show you this in the source code here. So scroll this up, and if I go back here, go to this page and figure out why that's not working. Style, display inline. That's weird. I would have thought that would work. Let me double check that. Let me view the source code. Maybe I got something wrong here. So for each of those links, I've got my details, just my form. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not the link. It's not the link that's displaying in line. Right? I'm going to use this anyway. I'm going to have to give this a class in a little bit. It's not the link that's displaying in line. Right? The links always display in line unless you tell them not to. What I want to do, I want my form to display in line. So what I'm going to do is this gets to be sometimes a little bit tricky because I'm going to specify my action name is going to be, I have to tell you, it really doesn't really matter that much what the action name is. Let me actually see if I can use a better overload here. So let me see my overloads. I just want to set an HTML attribute. I'm going to see how I can do it. See all these, the HTML attribute is after about 5 things here. So unfortunately, I'm going to have a little bit of a tough time finding it. Let's see. All right, I'm going to have to stick with one of these. So what I'm going to do here is none of these help, right? It's the one that I'm going to have to use is going to be this one, which is I'm going to have to put in the action name, the controller name, the form method, which is in a post, and then I'm going to be able to do my HTML attributes. So my action name is going to be delete. Okay. My controller name is going to be contacts. Okay. For my form method, this is an enumeration. It's going to be form method.post. And for my attributes, I'm going to have to go in here and there were other ways I could probably have done this in my style sheet. It's probably best not to put inline styles, but it's something you should be aware of here. And now if I say style display inline and I view this, okay, now it's in line. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a break and come back and finish this up. So what I'm going to do here, if you look at this code, I mean, this is what we're going to be doing is we're going to basically take this link that's in here. When it gets clicked on, we're going to use jQuery. Okay, we're going to hijack the link, and what we can do here, I mean, just because we have our form, and our form is not quite right. Our form is contacts delete. We're just going to grab this href, and we're going to set it to this action, and we're going to end up posting this, and then our delete will work. But let me save this up, and I'll be back in a little bit.